We first met when I was just a child in primary school. Alexei was a close friend of my brother, and there was a significant age gap between us. He was 8 years older. Despite the age difference, I found it intriguing to sit with them and listen to their conversations. Even though I knew Alexei didn't pay much attention to me at the time, I enjoyed laughing along with everyone else. My heart, however, belonged to Liosa during those days. By the time I completed my schooling, Liosa had already served in the army and was pursuing studies at the institute. One day, when he visited our house, his reaction to seeing me was unexpected. I felt a sudden rush of embarrassment as I realized no one had ever looked at me quite like that before. Later that evening, Liosa surprised me by calling and asking me out. It was an offer I had been secretly hoping for all these years. I couldn't turn him down, even though the situation felt more serious than the casual interactions of our childhood. Preparing for our outing, I chose to wear the dress my mother had bought me for graduation, opting for simple shoes and no makeup to maintain a natural look. We met at the park, and our evening together was filled with a stroll and ice cream. However, conversation didn't flow as easily as I had hoped. Unsure of what to say, I found myself at a loss for words, while Alexei remained silent, only inquiring about my life since we last met. His gaze, fixed on me throughout the evening, left me feeling both flustered and confused. Eventually, I mustered the courage to ask him directly about his thoughts, to which he responded with a compliment, expressing disbelief at the transformation from the ugly duckling he remembered from childhood to the beauty before him now. With that, our relationship blossomed, and I enrolled in the local institute to ensure we could remain together. My mother, recognizing Alexei's friendship with my brother, granted me permission to pursue the relationship. I was deeply infatuated with Alexei. To me, he embodied intelligence, wisdom, and capability. Our courtship lasted exactly 1 year, and as I completed my first year at the institute, Alexei surprised me with a proposal. While I was hesitant due to my young age, Alexei was adamant that it was time for us to start a family. Encouraged by my parents' support, I acquiesced. Our wedding was a dream come true, surrounded by loved ones and filled with joy. What made it even more special was having Liosa by my side. He had been a constant presence in my childhood fantasies of happiness. Following our wedding, I eagerly anticipated starting a family, and soon enough my wish was granted with the news of pregnancy. However, when I shared this joyous news with Liosa, his reaction was unexpected. He questioned the paternity of the child, casting a shadow of doubt over our happiness. From that moment on, my life descended into a nightmare. As my pregnancy progressed, Liosa's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He turned to alcohol, neglected his studies, and eventually dropped out of college altogether. Confusion and despair plagued me as I sought to understand what was happening. Even attempts to communicate with Liosa only resulted in hurtful words and curses. In summary, what began as a childhood crush evolved into a whirlwind romance, leading to marriage and the anticipation of starting a family. However, the joy of impending motherhood was overshadowed by doubt and turmoil, as Liosa's actions threatened to tear apart the very foundation of our relationship. It was time for me to give birth, but once again, my husband was nowhere to be found. Throughout the entire process, it was my parents who stood by me, offering their unwavering support. After being discharged from the hospital, I went to stay with them, but Liosa never came. My attempts to reach him by phone went unanswered, and I later learned that he had gone away for work, not planning to return for 6 long months. In his absence, I moved back into our apartment with our son. With the help of my father, we cleaned and repaired things as best we could. I eagerly awaited my husband's return, but by the time he came back, our son was already walking with the aid of a walker. However, There was no joy evident on Liosa's face upon his return, nor was there any anger. We resumed living together, and for a while everything seemed okay. But after a few months, something changed in Liosa once again. He began hurling insults at me, accusing me of things like texting other people because he couldn't understand that I was occupied with caring for our young child. Despite attempts to reason with him, his behavior deteriorated further, and he turned back to drinking. The drinking brought out the worst in him. He became verbally abusive and even physically aggressive at times. Despite the pain and humiliation, I endured it because I believed I loved him. Or at least I thought I did. Liosa's words cut deep when he claimed he had picked me up and that no one else would want me. My mother advised me to be patient, to wait and hope that Liosa would come to his senses. But the pain became unbearable, and the thought of divorce crossed my mind several times. Each time, Liosa would apologize upon learning of my intentions, and for a brief period, things would improve, only to deteriorate once again. I longed for a second child, preferably a daughter, but Liosa vehemently opposed the idea. Determined to have another child, I resorted to deception and did everything possible to get pregnant, eventually succeeding. When I broke the news to Liosa, he reacted more calmly, merely mentioning that he had to go on another long business trip to provide for the family. During my maternity leave, I moved back in with my mother for support. It made things easier, especially with my eldest child needing care. When the time came, I gave birth with the assistance of my parents. The arrival of my daughter brought immense joy, despite Liosa's continued absence. Even though Liosa was physically absent for much of the time, we maintained communication over the phone, exchanging kind words, though his presence was sorely missed. As the time for giving birth drew near, my husband remained absent, opting to extend his stay for another term. I found myself in dire need of financial support. Unable to rely solely on my parents, I turned to Alexe for help. Surprisingly, he responded positively, earning praise from my mother for his responsible attitude towards his children. However, the financial assistance Alexe provided fell far short of what was needed. Feeling overwhelmed, I reached out to Liosa again, only to face his anger and accusations. He yelled at me, insisting that I should depend on my parents for help, completely ignoring the fact that he too was responsible for our family's welfare. His harsh words left me in tears, grappling with the weight of responsibility. With bills piling up and necessities for my children becoming increasingly difficult to afford, I realized I needed to find a solution. Despite my desire to work, securing employment proved challenging, as most positions required full-time commitment, which I couldn't manage with my childcare responsibilities. Faced with limited options, my mother and I made the difficult decision to rent out our apartment, with Alexe's reluctant consent. We placed an advertisement and soon received interest from a man named Dimitri. Though initially apprehensive about renting to a single man, my circumstances left me with little choice. When I met Dimitri, I was taken aback by his youthful appearance and his willingness to pay 6 months' rent up front. Despite warning him about the apartment's condition, he remained undeterred, even expressing interest in making improvements. Our initial interaction left me cautiously optimistic, but it was when Dimitri contacted me again, requesting to meet in person to discuss renovations, that I began to see a glimmer of hope. Upon visiting his place, I was surprised to learn that he worked as an interior designer. Despite his plans to enhance the apartment, I hesitated, knowing it was still technically my husband's property. However, Dimitri's persistence and genuine interest in improving our living situation won me over. As we continued to meet, I found myself drawn to his kindness and understanding. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, as if we had known each other for years. In Dimitri, I found a confidant, someone with whom I could share my struggles and fears. I was upfront about my marital status and the challenges I faced, yet he never judged me. Instead, he offered unwavering support and encouragement, making me feel valued and appreciated. As our relationship deepened, I couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt and uncertainty about the future. Despite my growing feelings for Dmitri, I remained tethered to my marriage, unsure of how to proceed. However, fate intervened when Liosa unexpectedly returned, disrupting the delicate balance I had managed to establish. His presence brought chaos and uncertainty, forcing me to confront the harsh reality of my situation. Caught between the familiarity of the past and the promise of a new beginning, I knew I had to make a choice. And with Dmitri by my side, offering me the strength and support I needed, I found the courage to finally break free from the chains of my unhappy marriage.